We've produced a checklist for LMCs, to, again, from our end centrally, to make life easy. So we've written to every single LMC with exactly the components of the forward view, so that LMCs can see, has my area made this money available? So from our end, we've produced that information for every single LMC. We've also gone further, and we've now got a template where we want feedback to tell us what has or hasn't been made available. And if you tell us, for instance, that X, Y, and Z hasn't happened, that there is no money, for example, for practice manager development, that if next year you say there's no money for working at scale, we will of course be able to use that ammunition and take it up on your behalf. And I do. When we hear of anything, that's exactly what we do. Because I'm determined that NHS England must not squander this money that they say is available for general practice. And we've produced a focus on that again gives you more detail. So if any of you are interested, please go onto the BMA website. It will give you specific details of what is available. Premises is a real problem, as you all know. I mean, I presume that some of you you have got leases with NHS Property Services, is that right? So I think this slide is a little out of it. The biggest issue for you is that we are at the moment in active dialogue with NHS Property Services around the whole mess regarding facilities management and the fact that practices are being asked to pay for services that they have got no detail about and seem to be totally lack face validity, and we are in active dialogue to break that down so that there is fairness in the process. The cost directions should be finalised. I mean, we've been saying this for months now, but they should be finalised, which will include a provision in certain circumstances for 100% funding. There are some transitional relief for those that are signing new leases, but it won't be helping those practices that are in the middle of a dispute around current leases, which, as I said, we are in active dialogue with. Now, I want to just finish off, or rather go the last bit of my talk, to really talk about what we, as a profession, should be doing ourselves in trying to manage what is ultimately the biggest issue for us, which is managing workload, or rather unmanageable workload. And we know from a study done, commissioned by NHS England, that 1 in 4 GP appointments are avoidable. And in fact, our own experience tells us that if you actually just reflect on any of your surgeries and you look at those examples I gave earlier, the patient coming because of a problem in another part of the system, or you're being asked to do something you shouldn't, and including patients who can self-manage and self-care, estimated 1 in 4 appointments are avoidable. And if you could deal with even half of that, effectively, you'd be increasing the GP appointment capacity by X. And in fact, you could have 5,000 more GPs by simply reducing avoidable appointments by about, I think probably about 8%. So in fact, there is a potential for us to increase GP capacity by ensuring that our appointments are used in an appropriate sense. Part of that is giving you tools. So our Quality First website, which is a dynamic website, please keep visiting it because we put more and more information onto it, gives you a range of tools on how to reduce inappropriate workload, but how to optimize your appointments. So in addition to the hospital templates, there's all sorts of other templates to resist inappropriate workload, such as being asked to prescribe drugs that are outside our competence without it being commissioned. But there's also, Amir would be pleased to know this, there's a whole section about patient involvement, because we do believe that there is a potential of partnership with patients, including the self-care ideas I mentioned earlier, to reduce GP workload. It's something that I believe that we need to do much more of in bringing to the fore. And we've got some good case studies which have shown that to work. So that, and they're also in our website, there are a lot of tools and tips in working in a different way, whether it's, we've got a good example of telephone triage systems, for instance. So please have a look at that website about what we can do to empower ourselves. We also need to design general practice, that's our responsibility, based upon what the profession wants for the future. So we conducted a very big survey at the end of last year, November. Thank you for those of you who completed a very long survey. And what it shows is which is very worrying, is what we all know, is that the biggest pressure is for GP partners. Only 6% of GP partners feel their workload is manageable, compared to 12% of salaried GPs and 34% of locums. So it's no surprise that partners are just looking to move away from what is an unmanageable workload. Only 1 in 5 partners are content, and 1 in 3, as we speak, are looking for alternative arrangements. And that's what we're seeing happening in front of our eyes. And what we're seeing is a diminishing pool of partners taking on an over-expanding level of responsibility and feeling very vulnerable and overworked as a result. And it just becomes a domino effect. And as they feel that, they want to leave. And therefore, we do need to address this. Otherwise, we will see the collapse of partnership general practice if we don't address this. And these statistics show the very precarious position that GP partners are under in. And 79%, 4 in 5 GPs believe there should be incentives to enable GPs to become partners. It's something we need to look at. But we also need to be aware that in addition to partnership, the profession out there is very different from the job that I took on when everyone wanted to be a partner. I finished my training year on the 31st of July, became a partner on the 1st of August. I moved house. I've been in the same practice now for 27 years. That model isn't the model that a lot of GPs now want. And we have to be aware that we need to design general practice upon the aspirations of what GPs want. And in fact, GPs want to be working in a variety of ways. In fact, 32% are willing to work in new care models, including 1 in 5 being prepared to work in MCPs. So that's what people are saying. We need to make sure that we design a system based on where they want to go. In terms of reducing workload, we were quite surprised. When we asked GPs, what would you like to happen to reduce your workload? Did you know the most popular response was self-care and self-management? They thought that patients held the key to reducing workload, and that's from GPs themselves. And then they also wanted enhanced community nurses to look after patients in the community, especially those that needed home visits. And skill mix was also an interest. So the GPs out there are telling us that's what they want. They want to work in teams. When we asked GPs, how would you like more money put into general practice? We were again quite surprised that only a minority wanted the money just to go into Global Sum. They actually wanted the resource for, as I said earlier, the support of others around a practice. And I think the reason for that is that slide I showed you right at the beginning that showed that the contract was a tiny bit. And if you just go around beefing up the contract, you're not going to solve all the other pressures that are engulfing a practice. So we do need to address the environment. And I think the GPs themselves are saying that's what they want us, GPC, to be trying to negotiate. And that's what they want LMCs to be negotiating. We also actually, you will remember that there was the issues around industrial action. We produced a focus on industrial action last summer after the LMC conference. And I don't know whether if you looked at it, did any of you see this? But if you haven't, it's on our website, so please look at it. One of the big problems for GPs compared to hospital doctors is we're not protected, we're not immune from the legislation around strike action. And we can be held in breach of contract if we withdraw our services in a way that hospital doctors, employed doctors are not. So we did look at what are the legal ways of taking action, and we, without asking it as a ballot, we asked all those questions in our survey. And what it shows is that GPs, this is a response we got, are not really up for action. This is what in fact, only a minority would stop even registering patients. So we just need to be mindful. And the reason why GPs aren't is because most of the actions that they would take money away from them. If you stopped things, you would actually have money taken away. If you stopped enhanced services, it would take money away. And we have a very difficult financial climate, and that's probably the reasons why they're saying no. But only 60% they said they would stop work they provide voluntarily. So there's something about the profession, I think, being much clearer about stopping unresourced work, which I talked about earlier, with our quality first tools that we do need to make sure happen. I think also, remember GPs, by their very nature, want to help, but we need to be mindful that sometimes by trying to over-help, we are actually denying ourselves the ability to work to manageable levels. So on the theme of taking control, we believe at GPC that working together is a critically important option or an approach to sustain our workload at a time when the individual practice unit is at its most vulnerable, for the reasons I described earlier, the diminishing numbers of partners. And if you look at the regulatory pressures, you look at the financial volatility for a practice that I mentioned earlier, even a cough change could actually make a practice unsustainable, let alone enhanced services being pulled or MPIC changes or PMS reviews. So practices are vulnerable, and one way to address that vulnerability is to work in collaboration with others to create a secure framework of collaboration. And our BMA survey GP survey showed that more GPs believed that the progression of the independent contractor model or practices should be within a collaborative structure than for us to pursue the standalone model. So this isn't getting rid of practices. In many ways, this is about sustaining practices. It's about becoming bigger whilst retaining smallness. That's what this is about. So this isn't about homogeneous, large, impersonal structures. And 1 in 3 support multi-professional collaborative models. So we need to bear in mind that whatever our personal views, GPs out there are looking at these models, and therefore we need to develop a system to support them. In terms of the MCP model, which has some interest in Manchester, reminding ourselves that this is for 30,000 patients upwards. There are only 6 pilot sites that are going to go live in 17-18. So we need to be mindful that at a national level, MCPs aren't actually taking over the whole of England. Our negotiations brought in the ability for MCPs to encompass the national contract being retained by practices. The original idea by NHS England was about an alternative contract. Well, actually, 2 out of the 3 models allow you to retain your national contract, both the virtual MCP, which is an alliance contract. You're working to agreements that incentivize integrated working with shared incentives. And then the partially integrated MCP, where practices again retain their national contract, but can work at a super practice level to provide non-core services together with other providers if you choose, but you still have your national contract. And it's only the fully integrated MCP where the practice relinquishes its contract and enters into a local contract with its MCP. We're not sure how many of the integrated arrangements will actually go live, because we have obviously great concerns, because we fundamentally believe that the entire benefits of an MCP can be realized by retaining your contract and working within that collaborative structure. That's the key message. And it's vital to remember that this is voluntary. So sometimes when we get into this state of thinking it will be done to us, we need to say, well, no one can force us to do it, and we can choose the way we want to operate in an MCP arrangement. The other is the right to return. So there is a clause about the right to return, but be careful, because if you go into this arrangement, you may not have the same place to return to. Just think about 5-10 years later, who would be your patient population? Who would be employing your staff? Would the premises actually still be yours? So I think if a practice chooses to go down that route, it needs to think about the reality that returning may not be possible. It may be able to exit, but to return to where it left may not be possible. We're also likely to see an expansion of employed GPs working in these arrangements as well, and we need to be mindful of that. So this diagram just shows a schematic picture of what an MCP can look like. So at the top tier, those are GP practices that are what they call contract, but working within this MCP, either in a partially integrated manner or in an alliance contract. And those round blocks are where the GP practice is holding an internal contract with the MCP. And as you can see, community services and out-of-hospital diagnostics and services are part of the mix, which is what this integrated working is all about. And if I want to be positive about this, I think that one of the possibilities is to put an end to the perversities of tariff payments in these arrangements. You really do have the opportunity for the first time to commission a pathway where the resource goes to where it's provided, but that does require imagination from commissioners. Moving from national contracting, in our view, is worrying. We think that it really does open the door to a postcode lottery of care for patients, but a postcode lottery of terms and conditions for GPs and practices. You would lose all of your national protections and terms and conditions. If you think PMS has been an issue in terms of national representation, this just takes it to a completely different level. You will not have BMA and GPC able to represent you in those local contracts. There'll be increased bureaucracy in local negotiations. And QOF, which is considered to be a carrot, we hear that these local contracts will get rid of QOF, but actually they're all about practices getting that money back for some new way of achieving it. And if we're not careful, you'll still be doing your QOF work because that clinical care has to carry on, and you'll carry on having that data extracted for CQC and others, and then you'll be doing more work to earn the money back. So we just need to be careful that it's not really a carrot to lose QOF and then get it paid back. The other thing about these local contracts, including MCPs, is they're time limited. At the moment, there's a 10 to 15 year time period, which means that they will be re-procured. They could be re-procured before that time. And if they are re-procured, no matter how they're set up, they'll be re-procured with open tendering. And that's been a big concern for us, because that open tendering means that if you're a practice within such an arrangement, the MCP may not be your community provider. It may actually be a commercial company, it could be a global company. So these are things that need to be considered. So what we think that practices should do is remember it's voluntary and look at our guidance. Before you go into any arrangement, get professional advice, because the consequences can be significant. Crucially, we need to define our own futures. And if you look back at the history of general practice, all of the collaborative solutions that I can think of, and all of the solutions, advances for general practice I can think of, they all came from the profession itself. So if you go back to the 1990s, the advent of multi-funds, GP commission groups. When you looked at 1995, the GP cooperative movement, I've got Kumar sitting there. I mean, he revolutionized partly the whole movement of out-of-hours care when we couldn't cope with being shackled to a bleep on Christmas Day. So we, the profession, not the government, the profession, found a way of working together to manage workload. And we now need to look at the profession taking control of how it wants to work together with others as well, where the focus and needs are based upon our patients and our practices. And that has to be the key element in working together. And that's what I hope LMCs will support practices in. And this is already happening. So without me saying this, up and down the country, different practices are working in different ways collaboratively, whether it's a federation, whether it's Manchester or others. Primary Care Home was born out of GP clinical leaders. There's PATS and ACO development, acute trust running German GP practice. But super partnerships have just come out of nowhere. And in fact, in Birmingham, as you know, there's a large super partnership of nearly 300,000 patients. There's others that are smaller. But all these models are not MCPs. They've been born out of GPs themselves. And therefore, what we believe is this is what will work. And that's where, I came to it earlier, the £171 million is fundamental. Because that's money, transformation money, that's available to pump prime, to kickstart the organizational development to create these collaborative structures of our choosing. And that will be a battle, because CCGs will say that they don't have the money because the money's coming out of their baselines, but it's a battle that has to be had, because this will unlock, in my view, the ability for general practice to use this resource for its own needs. And the access monies need to be used, as I said earlier, intelligently, so that access is used to support in-house pressures and also integrated with some of our out-of-hours work, so that you don't have this wasted appointments and wasted resource. And this just reiterates the advantages of working at scale. At that bottom tier, those GP practices are just working within their current contract. Even today, without any new model, it is possible for practices to share staff, share services, provide cross-cover. And we just haven't done it since 2004. It's a pity, because the contract allows that, and I really hope that we can exploit this collectivism of working together. But at that top tier, if you create a federation or any other collaborative structure entity, we know that these models work in terms of management of back office, proactive crisis support. We know that we can have hubs for overspill work, which is, I think, already happening in Manchester in some parts. We know we can have systems of telephone triage on behalf of several practices, so you are not individually as practices having to be worried about surges of demand. We know that that the workforce can be employed by these new entities, including skill mix, so that practices can be supported by teams of managers, nurses and GPs when they need when they may be in a crisis, or where they don't have the ability to employ staff themselves. So these things can happen. We also know that if you create these models, you can integrate the nursing teams so that you don't have these squabbles around, the ear syringing that should not be done by the nurse, or the nurse saying, well, this patient's not on my caseload for a flu jab. All of this can be done, and in effect, that creates an MCP without calling it an MCP, and that will be professionally owned. We also at the BMA produced a paper as part of our urgent prescription on safe working, because the one thing that is unsafe for GPs is unmanageable workload, and this is the model of locality hubs, where overflow patients are seen in hubs. It's a live model that was presented last week at our Working at Scale conference, and I would recommend that you read that paper if you're interested. We have some examples so this is happening, and they range. So in Essex, these practices only have an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, where they work together. But in working together without any legal formalized structure, they're actually sharing minor injury, minor illness services, they're sharing staff, and they reduce a lot of bureaucracy. If you look at the Richmond hub, this is an example where the hubs are providing urgent care appointments for practices. So when practices are at limit, they actually refer on to the hub, who will not just see the patient, will have access to the records, and again, it puts a limit to what is currently unmanageable workload. So that's working in Richmond. We have a super partnership in Birmingham that, as I said, has 33 practices, nearly 300,000 patients. In fact, what's great about their super partnership is that practices retain their own NHS England resource, so the practices still work as autonomous units, but they're glued in to an overall structure that will end up with one CQC inspection for all of them, that in fact now is employing locums and other staff to support individual practices when they have difficulties. And we all can go through those problems. And they're just developing, as I said earlier, a hub model as well. The partnership with LMCs, I've laboured this time and time again, that we can only do our work at GPC if we're in partnership with LMCs. We've produced a host of guidance for LMCs in the last year. We have a reference group. We will be holding some webinars with LMCs. We held a big conference last week, a couple of you came to, which was extremely successful as part of working with LMCs on implementing Working at Scale. 28 different bits of guidance for LMCs that we've produced on a range of issues. And that sort of guidance is with legal and other expert advice, so you can trust that it's been developed with comprehensiveness as well. So in summary, we know we're operating within a grossly underfunded NHS, which in fact puts a constraint on everything we do. The contract negotiation was successful within that constraint. We know that general practice is part of a bigger picture. We know that the GP forward view money that has been announced from our end has to be delivered, and that's of course a joint partnership. We know we can only do that between LMCs and GPC. The profession has to resurrect that spirit of some empowerment and belief that it will fight. That survival instinct needs to be resurrected. We know that survival instinct is best achieved in a collaborative sense, where we look after each other. And we also know that the future of the NHS is going to have to be addressed in terms of the funding crisis. I can't believe the next general election carrying on with this sort of funding. The population will not be fooled anymore, and the crunch time will come funding the NHS properly. And if that is what the next elected government does, that's when we have the bigger cake, and that's when general practice needs to have its proper slice for an appropriate resource for us to do our jobs properly, looking after our patients. So we need to survive until that political crunch time. So thank you very much for listening. Happy to take some questions. Sorry, Mr.